Hi, I'm Kimberly, and I'm going to be presenting today on the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, also called the MMPI. Now, the MMPI was actually developed in the 1930s by psychologist Stark Hathaway and psychiatrist J.C. McKinley. It was not published until 1941 by the University of Minnesota Press. Now, it was originally designed to establish psychological diagnosis. So it was mainly used in clinics and other psychiatric and medical places. But today, it is the most widely used objective test for personality. And that's according to these guys right here, right? And these guys. Because the test does provide a really broad picture of a person's behavior and the symptoms of psychopathology. So now it's used in other areas too. So it could be used for personnel screenings, for sensitive jobs, so say police officers, airline pilots. So the MMPI, while it was originally developed in the 30s and it was widely used from the 40s until as recent as 1989, it's gone through some revisions. So in 1989, they had the MMPI-2, and the reason for this revision was that the old test was considered biased and was criticized as having racist or sexist questions. So there's also, besides the MMPI-2, there's also the MMPI-A, developed in 1992, used for adolescents, and the MMPI-2RF. Now this is actually a shorter version of the MMPI-2, so while the MMPI-2 has 567 items, the MMPI-2RF has 338. So the MMPI is actually a test in the form of a list, right? So there are like items, like statements, like, I like motorcycle magazines, and the point is to answer in a true or false fashion. Now, the MMPI is actually administered in a controlled setting, has 567 questions. It takes up to 60 to 90 minutes to complete, and it has to be taken in a controlled setting. So going through all of this trouble, taking all of this time, and true-falsing all of these seemingly random items, what is the point, right? What does this test actually assess? So let's get to that. So actually, what the test assesses is using 10 different clinical scales and 4 validity scales to measure, to make sure that there's like accuracy and truthfulness coming from the test taker themselves. It measures 10 different areas of like abnormal human behavior. So the 10 different scales that are assessed here are 1, hypochondriasis, 2, depression, 3, hysteria, 4, a psychopathic deviate, 5, masculine, feminine characteristics of the person being tested, 6, paranoia, 7, psychasthenia, 8 is schizophrenia, 9 is hypomania, and 10 is social introversion, extroversion. So now that you've heard a little bit about what the test is like, the MMPI, and how many questions there are, how long it takes, and what exactly it measures, you're probably wondering, like, what exactly are the questions that are being asked? Mainly they're statements, as mentioned before. So it could be something as simple as, I wake up fresh as a daisy every morning, or like most mornings, and then all you have to do is say like true or false. So we already know a little bit about how the test is administered, maybe a little bit about the kind of questions, how many questions. Now, how are experiments actually processed with this test? Right? It's going to have like maybe 2 groups of people, right? So there's going to be like a regular control group, your normals, and then like your experimental group. So in one study that I looked at, which actually was looking at the effects of testosterone on transgender men, but the groups that were used were obviously a large group of transgender men, and then as control groups they brought in non-trans male and female participants, and they were to be used as the control group in comparison to the original trans men group, right? Now, once an experiment like this is run, how is this information gathered? How is it measured? How is it analyzed, right? So basically, the psychologist that administers the test does score the test and then form an interpretive report constructed by the psychologist. So the scores are converted into what's called normalized T-scores, and these range from 30 to 120. And the normal range actually for T-scores is anywhere from 50 to 65. So if you're within that range, this is something expected. Without that range, so below 50 or above 65, these are scores that are generally considered clinically relevant or significant. And so those would be more open to interpretation, but by the psychologist administering the exam. So strengths, obviously, it's been widely used. It has so many questions, and it's possible to get a really large group to test this on. Then it's really useful. It can be very useful. It has these 10 different scales. It has the validity scales to make sure it's accurate. So what are some of the weaknesses that a test like this can have? So definitely, if you can't get the right size, because the test like this requires a very large size of a group in order to take it, so that it's valid and it can be used for interpretation. And also, as some authors have mentioned, there's also a problem with the way that that this test is situated in certain theories that that maybe are not as valid anymore. And so what do I think of a test like this, of using this type of assessment? I think it's super useful. Like I said, if we can get the large enough group to be able to test this accurately and usefully. At the same time, I do see the arguments made against it. So I think for me, the problem with the test is more fundamental. So who decides and why these type of questions, or why these items on this test? And so that would be my main complaint about it. But I do think that overall it is a useful method to use.